Chapter 10, Muscle Tissue, Part 5. So, muscle tension. Muscle tension is the force generated when a muscle is stimulated to contract. And one way to look at that is just to take a muscle from some organisms, say gastrocnemius from a frog, and have it attached to rods and a weight, and it's possible to apply voltage and then detect the amount of force generated by the muscle when it contracts. And this can be used to produce a chart known as a myogram. So again, graphically recording the changes in muscle tension when stimulated by a voltage. So what we find is that here is the myogram. You have the stimulus that is applied. There is a latent period, a period of time that it takes for the muscle to respond and begin to contract. It's time for that charge to move along the length of the muscle and the ions to move from one place to another. Then you have the contraction period, the amount of time in which the muscle is contracting and generating force until it reaches the peak of the force that it will be generating and stops contracting. And then, of course, the relaxation period when the muscle relaxes, returns to its normal length, and is, of course, generating no more force. So that, it turns out, the relaxation period is the longest period. So latent period, contraction period, relaxation period. Now, if you increase the amount of voltage that is used to trigger the muscle organ, you increase the tension. More force will be generated. So higher voltage, boop, higher amount of force of increased muscle tension until you reach a maximum plateau. So after that, increasing the voltage will not increase the amount of contraction. Basically what happens is the muscle is recruiting more and more of those motor units. More fibers are contracting with more voltage until basically you have all the muscle fibers contracting. Recruitment, of course, is basically just generating higher force by changing the number of motor units that are contracting at once. So increasing voltage increases recruitment until we get to maximum tension, maximum contraction. So experiments were used where they changed the frequency in the triggering of the contraction. So they'll take like 10 to 20 seconds between voltage shock to see what happens. And they found that when the frequency is between 10 and 20 per second, it allows for complete relaxation of the muscle, but each time they stimulate the muscle with the exact same amount of voltage, the amount of force generated will increase until they reach that maximum contraction. So again, each time it's the same amount of voltage, but because it's occurring so rapidly, the amount of force generated is actually increased. And it's thought that this additional tension that's being generated is because calcium ions did not have enough time to completely return to the cytoplasmic reticulum. So there's more cross bridges being formed when the next voltage is being generated. And this is referred to as a TREP. So TREP or TREPI is increased in contraction strength using the same amount of voltage because of frequency, speed of frequency. Now, they also went on to stimulate the muscles even faster than that. So now between 20 and 40 voltage shocks per second. The muscle fiber is not able to fully relax. So the muscle cannot completely relax. And it will build up and generate stronger contractions much more rapidly. So the summation of all the contractions are building up, giving us what's called a wave summation. If they speed up the frequency even faster, they get even more rapid and stronger contractions. This is referred to as incomplete tetany. So again, you increase the frequency that the voltage is used to trigger to stimulate the muscle contraction. You'll get wave summation as the muscles try to relax but don't get a chance to, increasing the amount of tension. And then if you make it even faster, you get even more rapid generation of force, incomplete tetany. And then finally, if you are stimulating it fast enough, say 40 to 50 shocks per second, you get what's called tetany. Tetany, the muscle is contracting at full force, as powerful as it can. All motor units are being recruited, and this will continue until eventually you get muscle fatigue. The muscle can no longer generate that amount of tension because it's using up resources, using up glucose, triglycerides, oxygen. It's forced to relax no matter what. So again, each of these stimulus is the same voltage, which originally only gave us a small amount of contraction, but by increasing the frequency, we're able to maximize the contraction in the muscle. All right, in our body, we're normally sending out less than 25 stimuli per second. No tetany is occurring. Our muscles don't fully contract, but they do have a little bit of tension on them at all times, and they sustain these contractions by just changing which motor units are being stimulated. So once a certain set of muscle fibers are getting fatigued, then a different set gets stimulated and take over. So it's kind of like a relay race, passing the baton to the next person because they are all nice and rested. Muscle tone, again, as I said, muscles are never completely relaxed. They're always being stimulated a little bit involuntarily. This gives our muscles their normal resting muscle tone, and this resting muscle tone dramatically decreases when we're asleep. Not a surprise. Muscles need to get a good, plenty of rest, plenty of relaxation. So, for instance, when you see a video of a cat or a kitten or a baby that's constantly starting to fall asleep and their head droops and they slump over, that is the decrease in muscle tone. And then when they jerk awake, the muscle tone is returning to the normal amount when they're conscious. Right, types of contractions. Our muscles are able to generate force, generate tension, and it can do this in a number of different ways. So one way is by the isometric contraction. In an isometric contraction, the muscle tension is insufficient to overcome resistance. So say someone is pushing on a tree or a wall, they're not strong enough to knock over that tree or wall, but they are generating force. They are using up resources. So there's an increase in tension, but the muscle length stays the same. Muscle contracts, increase in tension, but the muscle length stays the same. So that is an isometric contraction. And there's a whole series of exercises revolving around that, such as the plank. Then we have isotonic contractions. Isotonic contractions, you have increased in muscle tension, and it overcomes the resistance. So there is movement. Movement does occur. So tension is generated, and the length of the muscle changes. So contracting muscles to swing a tennis racket. That would be some isotonic contractions. We can break isotonic contractions into two smaller categories. So there's concentric isotonic contractions and eccentric isotonic contractions. Concentric isotonic contractions, the muscle shortens as it contracts, as it generates tension and force. So for instance, this man, his biceps brachii is contracting, getting shorter as he moves the infant up to him to give it a kiss or something. And then you also have eccentric contractions. Eccentric contractions, the muscle is contracting, it is tension is occurring, but the muscle is getting longer. So as the muscle lengthens, it is still contracted, still generating force. So as the man pulls the baby towards his face to give it a kiss, he smells the stanky diaper poo smell, and then the biceps brachii will begin to lengthen as the man slowly lowers the infant away from his face. So concentric contraction, muscles get shorter, generating force, causing movement. Eccentric contraction, muscles get longer, still generating force and causing a contraction. All right. So influence of muscle length on tension. So there is a relationship between the length of the muscle and how much tension, how strong of a contraction can occur. And so in a normal sort of muscle, you've got it when it's contracted and you try to generate more force, rested, and stretched. So it turns out the best length for a muscle to generate the most force is when it's at its resting length. If it's already contracted somewhat, it's not going to be generating as much more force. And then if it's longer, it also can't generate as much force. And as you can see, rested length, we have the optimized overlap between thick filaments and thin filaments. Already contracted, already shorter. If it's stretched out and lengthened, then there's not the optimized amount of overlap. So contracted. So fibers at rest generate maximum contractile force, optimized overlap. Fibers already contracted, they can only do weaker contractions because they're limited in how much more force they can generate. And when they're overstretched, we do not have that optimized overlap. Muscle fatigue. Muscles reduce over time the ability to generate tension. They get tired. This can be caused by a number of things. For instance, using your muscles, you can start to use up the glycogen stores. Glycogen, long chains of glucose. When you use up all the glycogen, you're using up all the glucose, making it harder to continue to contract the muscle and generate energy. Now, this can be caused by excessive exercising, lots of pull-ups, lots of jogging, lots of running. Other possible issues causing muscle fatigue. You could have problems with excitation at the neuromuscular junction. So if there's not enough free calcium ions anymore, then it's going to be harder to cause a release in acetylcholine. Or if you have too few synaptic vesicles in the synaptic bulb, you're not going to have as much acetylcholine to release. So issues at the neuromuscular junction. You also can have issues in excitation and contraction. This is due to a disruption in the ion concentration. So the ion balance, lots of sodium outside the cell, lots of potassium inside of the cell, has been disrupted. It's not the ideal gradient. And so with already having too much sodium ion inside the cell the cell can no longer generate the muscle action potential. So again, inappropriate distribution of ions. Another problem could be associated with the cross-bridge cycling. We could have increase in phosphate ions, making it more difficult to release phosphate ions from the myosin, slowing down the cycling, the cross-bridge cycling formations. We could have low levels of calcium ions. If there's not enough calcium ions being released by the sarcoplasmic reticulum, then it's less for the troponin, so fewer troponin proteins will be able to be bound to calcium ions to initiate the contraction. So in either case, too much phosphate or not enough calcium would lead to weaker muscle contractions. All right, people who engage in a lot of weightlifting exercises can cause their skeletal muscles to get bigger, bulkier. It's called hypertrophy, so increase in muscle size from repetitive stimulation of the fibers ends up with more mitochondria, more glycogen, more ATP being produced, thicker, wider skeletal muscle fibers because more myofibrils are produced, and now there are also more myofilaments. So increased numbers of myofibrils, increasing the size. Atrophy is the opposite. It's a decrease in skeletal muscle size caused by decrease in muscle fiber size. So if for some reason for a long period of time someone's not using a muscle, it will reduce in size, decreasing the tone, decreasing the strength of that muscle. Initially, atrophy can be reversed. So if your muscles start to atrophy, you can reverse it. But over a long period of time, it becomes more and more difficult to replace the muscle that has been atrophied and to regain that muscle function. Because over time, muscle fibers will just go away and be replaced with connective tissue. All right, and that's where we'll stop for this